And welcome back, students. We're going to continue talking about references and class parameters. Today we're going to discuss the constant null. So with null, this is a constant. It's just very special, really. So it's a specialized constant that may be assigned to a variable of any class type. So it's not restricted to like string or anything else. It can be assigned really to any class type. Now it's used to indicate that the variable in question has no real value. Not that it's zero, not that it's empty, or it has no real value. That's what null means. Like it's like nothing. Now, if the compiler consists that you initialize a variable of a class type and there's no suitable object with which to initialize it, we can use the value null, such as in the following example. Your class, your object equals null. And we've seen this before. We've made some class objects before, and it wants an initial value. You might have to give it, something like, 0 or just an empty string, something like that. But in this case, if we don't have that initial value right off the get-go, we can use null to kind of set that up to start. It is also common to use null in constructors to initialize instance variable, of a class type when there's no obvious object to use. And we'll eventually see other uses for the constant null. But this again is another instance of null. So we've seen constructors before, and a lot of times when you make a constructor method, sometimes you have to make starting values. So you have a constructor. Let's just think about like one where it's like you have a string name and int age. You may not want it to have the values immediately set into that object. And maybe you don't want to have values. You just want it to have a name and an age. But those name and age don't have any values until the user actually enters them in for the program. And that's what you can use null for. Now, please note that null is not an object. All right. It's not a member of anything like string. It's not a class object. It's simply just a reference, which, if you recall, is for memory addressing. All right. And it does not refer to really any object. All right. So it doesn't name a memory location. So when you create, let's say, a string name and set equal to null, it doesn't map to a memory location because it doesn't have one. So if you want to test whether a class variable contains null, you could use equals equals or not equals. You do not actually want to use an equals method. So, for example, the following correctly will test if two objects are null. If your object equals null, system.out.println, no real object here. All right, quick pitfall to note, the null pointer exception. If a compiler asks you to initialize a class variable, you can always initialize the variable to null. And we've kind of mentioned that previously. However, if null is not an object, you can invoke a method using a variable that is initialized to null. So, for example, if you had a method that came along and wanted to, like a get method, you wanted to get whatever information set in there and it's currently set to null, that get method is not going to be very happy with you. If you try to use that object that has a null value, you're going to get a message popping up in the compiler, usually in your console. It'll say, Java error, blah, 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 and it'll say null pointer exception. So, for example, the following code will produce a null pointer exception if it were included in a program. Code class a variable equals null, string representation, a variable dot toString. If you think about that, that makes sense because you're trying to write to a string, nothing. It's not even an empty string, it's just a string that doesn't exist. And then, like I said, this is the problem. It's like you're trying to take toString using null as a calling object, but again, null is not an object, just a placeholder. So null has no methods of which can be used on it. All right. Now, because we're using null incorrectly in this case, the error message will read null pointer exception. You get this error message anytime a class variable has not been assigned a reference to an object, even if you have not assigned null to the variable. Anytime you get a null pointer exception, look for an uninitialized class variable. The way to correct the problem is to use new to create a class object, such as follows. Code class 2, a variable equals new class 2, channel 3. String representation, a variable, toString. And that's it. That's really the best way to defeat the null pointer exception, and that's to assign a value to it. So that's going to wrap our notes up for today, folks. So until next time.